Thank you. Well, my job this afternoon is to summarize about a decade of work on shared value in just minutes and its significance for communications. So let's start from the beginning. When Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, with a handful of us, created FSG, the basic idea was to create a firm that would uncover the practices across sectors that led to extraordinary social impact. And when it comes to corporations, creating shared value is such a practice. When companies focus their innovation power on advancing the social conditions that are most linked to their competitiveness, not only do they create enormous opportunities for the business, but they're a formidable force to address our global challenges. Next. Oh, I don't think we actually have the right presentation up. Next slide, please. No, it's not the right presentation. It's 6 slides. I have the USB plug if you want. I'll keep on going and then you can load it up. Great. So yes, that's the right picture. Great. So to tell you more and explain shared value, I was going to take you through a journey, the Porter-Kramer journey of 3 articles in Harvard Business Review. And I'm curious, actually, I can't really see you, but quick show of hands, how many of you have read one of these articles? At least one. Boy, we need help from communication officers. Well, it's a great chance to tell you about this. Our journey on shared value started about a decade ago, in 2002. And we started actually by looking at corporate philanthropy, which was very relevant in the context of the Americas and Asia particularly. The notion that, and guided by a notion in these countries and regions particularly, that companies have a moral obligation to give back. And that's a good concept. But we were not impressed with its results. Because what it led is really the concept of moral obligation doesn't allow or doesn't give a sense of focus for companies. And it led to a lot of dilutions. We saw many companies doing hundreds of very worthwhile community projects, but very little of these community projects actually had extraordinary social impacts. But there were exceptions. Companies like Cisco, and we wrote about this in this initial article of 2002, did the same thing, did one thing in 165 countries, training 4 million youth in network administration skills through their Cisco network academies, essentially creating the workforce that their customers needed to power the technologies that they sold. So in that article, we really stumbled on the first ingredient of shared value, is that when companies focus their external investments on the social conditions that create constraints to their own growth and productivity potential, they create shared value. They create value on those conditions, and they create value for the business. And then as of 2003, we looked at it the other way. We had looked at how society impacts business. Then we looked at the other side, and we said, how does business impact society? And again, there were some very powerful concepts already on the table 10 years ago. License to operate, sustainability. And those concepts guided companies to deal with all the possible negative impacts that they had in society. And this was a good thing, because it raised awareness in business of their social impacts. And it triggered a lot of action. But it also diluted action. And a lot of this action came as an extra cost to business, so there's only so much business could do to mitigate their negative impacts. But what we worried about is those concepts had the risk of missing another part of the dimension, is that businesses have actually a tremendous opportunity to impact society positively through their business. And in that article, just to make it simple, we used the example of the Toyota Prius, which was a big deal about 10 years ago. We said you could focus, when you make cars, on reducing your carbon emissions in the manufacturing process. But look at what happens when your product itself, through the users, allows thousands to reduce, or millions to reduce, their carbon emissions. And that's really powerful. So we had stumbled on the second ingredient of creating shared value, is that you can actually address social issues through your business model. And if you do so profitably, then it scales. It's scalable. And you can go to large scales and have enormous impact in the world. And actually, if I can open a small parenthesis, it was at that time that actually Michael and Marc and some of us were invited by Nestlé to come and discuss the contents of that second article that was at the time in draft in 2004. And that led to a wonderful partnership. Not only did we coin the term shared value together, but we have ever since continued to learn together. Peter Brabeck, chairman of Nestlé, and Michael Porter just a few weeks ago were leading a shared value summit in Boston, which is meant to accelerate through a community of practice the understanding of shared value through business. It's been a wonderful partnership. And as we progressed, for the 2011 article, we realized that shared value, as it was gaining momentum throughout the world, wasn't just an issue of individual investments or initiatives within business. It was becoming core to strategy, core to what business is about. Leaders across the world understanding that business that advances social conditions is inherently more successful because it creates the conditions for business to succeed in the long term. And that's what Michael, in this article, defined as, redefining capitalism. But we were also, next slide. In that article, we also very pragmatically understood the three clear, simple ways in which business creates shared value. And I've mentioned the first, is that business has a tremendous opportunity to innovate products and services to meet unmet needs, focusing on the billions who don't have rather than the millions who have. But even the millions who have, focusing on their nutrition needs, on their needs as aging people, their health needs, their mobility needs, their housing needs. A wealth of opportunity for business innovation. Second way in which shared value is created is in enhancing productivity in the value chain. And unlike sustainability that said we need to look at all our negative impacts, there are really two areas where you can create shared value in very powerful ways. By focusing on your use of natural resources, and on your labor costs. And if you drive productivity in those areas, those biggest cost areas around these things, essentially what you do is you lower your use of natural resources and you enhance skills and you protect people throughout the world. And that's incredibly powerful in terms of creating shared value. And the third, I alluded to already as well with our initial 2002. There are many opportunities for business to invest in the conditions that ensure their future growth and productivity potential. The issues in the communities that are most related to that potential. But by 2011, we had learned something really important, is that business needs to work in coalitions to change business contexts. And there's a whole new wealth of partnerships and work that's happening in those areas. Next slides, please. Now, what I wanted to do is tell you stories, product stories, and value chain stories and context stories. I don't think we're going to have the time, so I'm just going to send here some highlights. But here's the story of Dow, focusing on the problem of bad fats in the US, and a team within Dow innovating seeds for new oil without trans fats, becoming the #1 product in the US, taking 600,000 tons of bad fats out of the diet, saving thousands of lives. Incredible story of innovation. Becton Dickinson medical devices company, at the height of the HIV pandemic in the 1980s, realizing that there was a high risk of co-infection from needle stick injuries, designed the first safety syringes. Great success, and it rolled into a series of innovations protecting health workers, which are now worth in that business unit 25% of the company's revenue. Next slide, please. Powerful examples of companies focusing on resource use and labor costs. Intercontinental Hotels Group, understanding that energy is the second largest cost in hotels. Building a system that identified through pilots what the return on investment would be of a variety of investments on climate control in the hotels, on computer use, on lights, etc., solar panels. Rolling that information out to their franchisees who can enter their own information, understand the ROI they can get from investing in that, and as they invest, feeding that information back into the new ROI into the system, a rolling and learning system that's been rolled out to 2,000 hotels, saving up to 25% of their energy costs and tens of millions of dollars. The story of Novo Nordisk focusing on business context and communities. They entered China understanding that changing diets would cause the rise of diabetes, or did cause the rise of diabetes. But the health system was very poor in actually tracking and spotting and diagnosing diabetes and treating patients. 4 out of 5 patients were not diagnosed properly in the health system. So Novo Nordisk, together with the government, invested in rethinking the protocols for treatment, in training physicians in primary first, then tertiary, secondary and tertiary hospitals, combined with a massive patient awareness campaign, reversing the trends, saving 140,000 life years, saving the health system hundreds of millions of dollars, and gaining a 60% market share of the insulin market in China over time. So these stories, next slide, have inspired leaders across the world, and shared value is truly a global phenomenon. But actually, leaders also find it quite difficult to implement. This is a deep transformation in business, to consistently integrate the social dimension of business in every single decision. It doesn't come naturally, not least because some of the prevailing legacy business models are actually very profitable. Why change? Michael Porter has this campaign. He wants to change the entire curriculum in business schools to integrate whatever you're looking at, finance, marketing, communications, an understanding of shared value. So our next work has been devoted, and this is actually our next article coming up in Harvard Business Review this summer, is devoted on the how of shared value. What's changing in businesses that are leading the way in shared value? And this is where communications folks, you should pay attention, because all of these relate in some way to your function. And we've understood that there are at least 5 new practices that are underway. And the first one is that leaders in shared value companies are relentless in elevating the purpose of the company to be not just about making money, but about solving social problems. They embed purpose in the organization. It makes the identification of social innovation opportunity normal activity. It channels resources towards social innovation. It captures the hearts and minds of employees. We had one person in one of the companies say, actually it puts fire, it's not just a set of words, it puts fire in the entire organization. And we see organizations giving a name to their purpose. Dow, Breakthrough to World Challenges. Nestle, Nutrition, Health and Wellness. BASF, Enabling Life. IBM, Smarter Cities. Sense of purpose. Guiding every decision. And we see leaders in businesses appealing to legacy values, often of the original founders. Even if you're multinational 100 years down the road, the original founder had actually a very strong social purpose. What they do is they spotlight innovations in the business that are consistent with the strategy and purpose of the business. Give those stories in their reports. That's what we mean by shared value innovation. And we want more of this to happen. They quantify the threats and opportunities from social issues to the business and make it very real to the more financially oriented people. And they're relentless in their communications. Every team meeting, every workshop, they talk about the purpose of the company, how to drive that forward. Second set of practice, define needs. Companies have understood that to create shared value, you actually have to change a social condition. It's not good enough to just contribute something useful. It's much easier to add a nutrient to a food product across the board and not think about who's going to consume it. It's much harder to design a product that's actually going to change the nutrition and health condition of a specific population. So they're understanding that research has to be much deeper. Stakeholder engagement, much deeper to understand the problems and to design a pathway towards change that's going to actually work in the field in sometimes very difficult circumstances. New set of skills, hiring people from the social sectors who can help you understand those needs and pathways to change. Pathway to change leads us to the third set of practice around measuring shared value. And this is an entirely new field, and we have a paper that came out just a few months ago that we wrote together with Michael Porter on measuring shared value. And there are only a dozen or 2 companies we could find who are starting to do this consistently, systematically linking the achieving of social results with achieving financial results for the company. And doing that for 2 reasons. One, anticipating that linkage convinces CFOs to invest in the social innovation processes. Second, measuring unlocks value and more shared value as you progress. Novo Nordisk understood as it progressed in China that it was actually getting a lot more shared value creation from investing in secondary and tertiary hospitals where the needs were even greater, getting even more patients to be diagnosed in those hospitals, and reallocated resources towards that part of the market and therefore unlocked even more shared value from measurement. Fourth set of practice is around co-creation. Now, business has always been good about teaming up with academia or selective partners to roll out some innovations. But with social innovation, there's a whole new dimension. Co-creation goes to very targeted networks. Companies are forming networks of expert organizations and experts around their target issues to be able to use and together co-create shared value. Some are more interested in the social value side of it, and some more in the economic value side of it. But they use them for idea generation, for development of the social innovation, for delivery of the social innovation, and even for measurement. And the final set of practices which are emerging are around developing the proper social innovation structures within companies. And this is a fascinating new area, because actually the right structure seems to be guided by the other ingredients in that picture. If you have purpose, you know what needs you're going after, you have a strong business case, then by all means, this is a pipeline of ideas that is flowing through your normal business processes, through your normal R&D, your normal manufacturing, marketing, etc. But companies are not saying, if you don't have the proper financial social hurdle rates, let's kill those ideas right away. They're actually building parallel structures. We see that in the pharma sector. The second structure they're doing, particularly when the business case is not yet entirely tested, is they're creating social business groups. We see companies like GSK or Novartis doing that. Not with the ultimate aim not to be as profitable or as competitive as the rest of the business, but giving innovation more time. And even they're using philanthropic vehicles where you leverage public and philanthropic funds through social innovation funds when the business case is really not yet proven, or when the need is not quite fully understood, and giving that as a resources to business leaders and champions to try things and innovate. M-Pesa, which represents now 18% of Safaricom's revenues in mobile banking in Kenya, was started with a grant from DFID. And we have numerous examples of businesses which are very successful now that were actually initially publicly or philanthropically funded. So they're learning how to use these structures in parallel. Now, so what's fascinating about these new sets of practices in business is that they're mutually reinforcing. Purpose helps you focus on which needs you're going to try to understand. An understanding of need reinforces purpose. Purpose allows you to co-create because partners recognize, next slide, that you're authentic about your engagement on these issues. So communications for shared value is actually an enormously important part of this picture, because you have a job to help enable sharing that sense of purpose and transforming the business to understand that the social dimension of business is essential to the future. It's through all that internal communications I talked about, but it's also through that external communications to stakeholders. Co-creation is a very important element, is communications, building trust among partners through communications. And finally, of course, around measurement. The whole new next dimension of measurement is not just to help allocate resources within companies, but from an investment perspective across companies, to the companies that are creating the most shared value. And so the results from measurement will become more and more important in terms of content to communicate and explain to shareholders as we move forward. Anyway, so here are tidbits of our journey on shared value. I hope I've enticed you to read those articles. You can pay for them on Harvard Business Review or get them for free on sharedvalue.org. But more important, I hope you've become agents of shared value in your roles as communications officers. Thank you.